Many factors have to be taken into consideration before remaking a video game. Of course, the most important to ask is also the simplest: is there demand? Some games that are given the modern rework are painfully obvious choices, others, well, you have to ask the question why. With that in mind, I'm Sai, this is What Culture, and these are 10 video game remakes no one asked for. Number 10, GoldenEye 007. It's hard to comprehend how impactful GoldenEye was, thanks to its accessible controls for the time, mission-based gameplay, perfect soundtrack, flawlessly structured levels, and masterful multiplayer. It revolutionized the first-person shooter and proved movie tie-in games could be top quality. It also made everyone develop an unbridled hatred for Oddjob. As a result, Bond enthusiasts were giddy with excitement upon learning that GoldenEye 007 was being remade. Sadly, that elation turned to confusion when it became apparent that 2010's GoldenEye 007 was a remake in name only. Daniel Craig was portraying James Bond in the films at the time, so it was decided the martini-guzzling secret agent would be modelled off of him instead of Pierce Brosnan. To further emulate the modern Bond era, this revision removed the banter with Q and Moneypenny prior to missions, since the characters hadn't appeared in the on-screen reboot at the time. Bond's relationship with the main villain Alec Trevelyan was completely rewritten, distancing the plot from the source material once again. Anyone intending to give this GoldenEye 007 a go purely to scratch the nostalgic itch was shocked to learn that the levels had been redesigned from the ground up, so basically this reboot had little resemblance to its N64 counterpart. Ironically, the game itself was pretty solid, but it was so divorced from what came before it seemed disingenuous to call it a GoldenEye remake.
Want to stay safe online and save big? Well, now you can. Right now you can get up to 76% off NordVPN with 3 months free, and all you've got to do is click the link in the description or scan the QR code that's on screen right now to get yourself signed up.
Number 9, the House of the Dead remake. House of the Dead stood out amongst other light gun titles during the late 90s, and not just because of the gore. Sega's creepy FPS was praised for focusing on destructible environments, saving survivors and targeting enemies' weak points. The game also had tons of replayability thanks to various branching paths. Unexpectedly, Megapixel Studio announced a remake was coming in 2022. Whilst the game had been sadly stuck on the Sega Saturn until that point, there were concerns how modern consoles would accommodate the gameplay without light guns. The answer was badly. Simply put, the zombie rail shooter doesn't work nearly as well with analog sticks or buttons. Although there are multiple control options, including the Nintendo Switch, they prove to be largely wonky, overly sensitive, or imprecise. Also, one integral part of the original was how you had to fire away from the screen to reload. Everyone remembers, shoot outside of the screen, leaving yourself momentarily vulnerable. Unfortunately, the tension in the remake is heavily diminished since you can reload with the press of a button. The brainless flesh eaters have never looked better, but House of the Dead isn't the same without the traditional control scheme, having missed the boat that the second and third games got on board with their Wii ports. In hindsight, if anything, it would have been better if the 97 version was re-released for preservation purposes at least. Number 8, Horizon Zero Dawn. There's been a greater push recently to release remastered games several years after the original launched. Rather than waiting a decade or two like the olden days, gaming execs will slap a lick of paint on a recent game before churning it out at full price solely to make a little extra cash. One game that demonstrates this growing issue is 2017's Horizon Zero Dawn. Even though the graphics haven't aged a day and the futuristic RPG plays better than most titles nowadays, it got the remaster treatment 7 years later. In fact, this was technically its second remaster in a sense, since the game already got a PlayStation 5 upgrade. Now, to be fair, a ton of work was put into the 2024 version, including 10 hours of re-recorded mocap and a deluge of graphical improvements. Whilst tech analysts have said that the amount of work behind the curtain is enough that it's basically a remake rather than a remaster, on the surface the tweaks are so slight it's challenging to distinguish the difference between either version. Horizon Zero Dawn is by no means the first game to have a rushed remaster, but it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Steam shows that the original has been outperforming the recent incarnation since its release, indicating players have grown tired of this money-grabbing gimmick. Also, the fact that the classic version was delisted on the Epic Game Store and Steam purely to boost the remaster sales came across desperate and manipulative. We love you, Horizon Zero Dawn, but come on. Number 7, 13. It may have its defenders, but 2003's 13 had a plethora of problems. Yes, it looks gorgeous and its voice acting was ahead of its time, but Ubisoft's comic-based shooter was bogged down by aimless combat, poorly structured levels, witless AI, and an imbalanced weapons system. Due to 13's divisive reception, it was strange when Playmagic agreed to launch a remake. It was more puzzling when the 2020 incarnation proved to be one of the worst games of the decade. The new 13 came across as unfinished, rife with bugs, technical issues, and audio inconsistencies. Despite the fact the original graphics were praised highly and were probably the most memorable thing about the game, the cel-shaded look was inexplicably scaled back, making this 13 look like just another generic shoot-'em-up. Ironically, the atrocious reception triggered a sales increase in the original 13, allowing the 17-year-old game to outsell its remake in its opening week in the UK. Due to how badly 13 was mishandled, the publishers couldn't trust Playmagic to fix it, urging them instead to hire Tower 5 to remedy the issues, which honestly hasn't gone all that well either. And worst of all, this debacle has left 13's reputation in tatters, making the likelihood of another revival virtually non-existent. Number 6. Bomberman Act 0. The bulk of Bomberman's gameplay involves cornering enemies and blowing them up with high-powered explosives. That premise may sound dark out of context, but Hudson Soft's pioneering franchise is renowned for its light-hearted vibe and cutesy aesthetic. That's why it was nonsensical when the adorable maze adventure title received a gritty reboot in 2006. Bomberman Act 0 did away with the kiddie design, replacing it with realistic brown and grey. Rather than playing as the cheerful and upbeat hero we're all familiar with, you took control of a futuristic soldier who's trying to escape from a labyrinth-like dystopia. To the surprise of nobody, Act 0 was lambasted for its forced edginess and failing miserably to capture the spirit of its predecessor. Not only that, there's no diversity in the gameplay whatsoever, since every level is identical. Not only was Act 0 absolute drivel, it highlighted that Bomberman doesn't need to be rebooted. Like Tetris or Pac-Man, every remake, reimagining, and reboot of Bomberman has failed to improve on the original concept, which Hudson Soft perfected when the franchise was still in its infancy. Though companies keep attempting to revitalize the addictive brand, Bomberman was at its best in the good old days. Number 5. Contra Operation Galuga. There was a time when Contra was the best run and gun in the business, but for one reason or another, the later sequels never recaptured that spark, causing Konami's bullet hell adventure to fizzle out. Considering Contra hasn't been at the top of its game for 30 years, it didn't generate much buzz when a remake of the original was announced in 2024. Contra Operation Galuga has a few notable improvements, but doesn't come close to matching the 1987 version for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's too hard. That might sound redundant since Contra is renowned for being tough as nails, however Operation Galuga is nightmarishly difficult, even on the easiest mode, to the point where the later levels are unplayable unless you've memorized every enemy's attack pattern and have the reflexes of a fly. The gameplay is constantly interrupted by banter between the heroes, which is badly written, poorly delivered, and pointless. The classic game didn't have Oscar-winning dialogue either, but the cutscenes here draw attention to how one-note the ensemble are. On top of that, the graphical overhaul was woefully minimalistic. In fact, Operation Galuga would have benefited by going back to its roots and embracing its pixelated design like Shovel Knight or Mega Man 9. Anybody still keen on playing Contra should download the first game rather than wasting time on this lazy rehash. Number 4. Secret of Mana. Secret of Mana was among the most beloved of Super Nintendo games thanks to its real-time battle mechanics, beautiful soundtrack, charming characters, and intricate story. For this reason, role-playing lovers were down for a three-dimensional reimagining of the Square classic with modern graphics akin to, say, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Although Q Studios released a 3D remake in 2018, it was anything but modern. The graphical upgrade is so mild, Secret of Mana 3D wouldn't look out of place on the PlayStation 2. There were a couple of improvements, including an on-screen map, more accessible save points, and improved companion AI, but Secret of Mana 3D still felt like a minimal effort collectively. Players will be tempted to mute the cutscenes due to the monotonous and stilted voice acting. Although the fight system was great in the 90s, it feels dated now. Overall, this version didn't smooth out any issues the original suffered, including the glitches and difficulty spikes. Now, that's not suggesting that there isn't demand for a Secret of Mana reimagining, but if this was all they were going to do, then a simple port of the original would have been much more cost-effective and time-effective. Number 3. Until Dawn. In Supermassive Games' interactive horror, you need to rely on a butterfly effect mechanic to help your party survive the night. Until Dawn was a decent title and contained a few cool features, but it wasn't exactly screaming for a remake. Nevertheless, Ballistic Moon tossed out a new version less than a decade later with all the bells and whistles you'd expect, including additional interactions, extra modes, and new camera mechanics. Slapping a 9-year-old game with a full price tag was cheeky enough, but Until Dawn version 2 could have gotten away with it if the developers actually bothered to bring their A game. But with the shoddy gameplay, clunky controls, blatant glitches, and 30 frames a second locked performance, any changes were for the worse, especially the diluted music score, and the additions like the Totem minigame didn't even bother to justify their own existence. Also, the exaggerated facial expressions might be triggering for anyone who played pre-patch Assassin's Creed Unity. With a peak concurrent player count of 2,600 on Steam, 2024's Until Dawn sold almost as badly as Concord. Number 2, Ape Escape on the loose. PS1 had such a stacked catalogue, there were bound to be a few games that went under-celebrated, and sadly one of the sorry few that fell between the cracks largely was Ape Escape. It may look like a generic platformer on the surface, but Ape Escape was revolutionary since it was the first game to make use of the PlayStation's DualShock controller. You used one analog stick to move the protagonist Spike, while the other controlled the direction he faced. It's a simple idea, but crucial since Spike needs to be precise in his movements to grab the cheeky chimps. Basically, the gameplay wouldn't be the same without the double analog sticks, which is why it was nonsensical when Ape Escape was remade for the PSP, a handheld that contains a singular analog stick. Ape Escape on the loose tried to replicate the classic gameplay by substituting the face buttons for the second stick, but unfortunately the 4 blocky buttons didn't have the same finesse, making the gameplay tedious and imprecise. There's nothing wrong with an Ape Escape revisit in principle, but the developers should have made On the Loose available on a system that can utilize its specific control scheme. And number 1, Warcraft III Reforged. Warcraft III Reforged perfectly encapsulates the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The original Warcraft III Reign of Chaos set a new standard for online gaming, becoming the most influential RTS ever almost overnight. After winning countless accolades and raking in sales, the smartest thing Blizzard could have done was leave it alone. But in 2020, they released a so-called enhanced version called Warcraft III Reforged. This abomination had a myriad of technical issues, downgraded graphics, and an unplayable multiplayer suite. Not only did it remove most of the best mechanics, it excluded many promoted features such as the cinematic cutscenes. Of course, Reforged would have earned a place on this list for that. It's noticeably worse than the first version. However, the reason that it's number 1 is because it did something else that was unforgivable. Reforged famously wasn't just the new version of Warcraft 3, it replaced the original game. Once this dud was released, Reign of Chaos no longer existed. If players wanted to keep playing, they had to settle for this crappy version, which was like a dagger through the heart for those who had been with Warcraft 3 from the beginning. Have a wonderful day.